Power builds slowly, death comes fast. One swing of an axe, one pull of a rope, one flash of a blade, and centuries of rule crumble in minutes. Revolutions that took decades to brew explode the moment a head hits the basket. Wars that seemed impossible become inevitable when blood hits the scaffold. Witch executions didn't just end lives, but flipped entire civilizations. 7 names, 7 deaths, 7 moments when the world held its breath and then erupted. These aren't just murders. These are the precise moments when history pivoted on steel and wood, when power transferred not through treaties but through terror, when single deaths triggered avalanches that buried entire eras. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from primary court records and contemporary chronicles. Now, back to the story. Number 1. Charles I, January 30th, 1649, Whitehall, London. The king who claimed divine right to rule faced a wooden platform built in 3 days by parliamentary carpenters working around the clock. Parliament had tried him for high treason against his own people through a specially created High Court of Justice that had never existed before in English law. 26 witnesses testified over 3 weeks of unprecedented proceedings. 59 commissioners signed his death warrant with trembling hands, knowing they sealed their own fates. The executioner wore a mask and disguise. Even the headsmen feared what revolutionary forces they were unleashing. The trial had been orchestrated by Oliver Cromwell and the army grandees who controlled Parliament through military force. Westminster Hall packed with over 1,000 spectators for 3 weeks, starting January 20th. Charles refused to recognize the court's authority. Never removing his hat in respect, "I would know by what power I am called hither," he demanded repeatedly, his voice echoing off ancient stone walls. John Bradshaw, the presiding judge, wore a steel-lined hat crafted specifically to stop royalist bullets. 200 armed soldiers surrounded the prisoner's dock with loaded muskets and fixed bayonets. 10 in the morning under gray January skies that threatened snow. Thousands pressed against wooden barriers erected 50 yards from the scaffold. Charles wore 2 shirts, so the bitter cold wouldn't make him shiver and appear cowardly. He had spent his final night writing farewell letters to his children and receiving communion from Bishop William Jukes. The scaffold stood 10 feet high with black mourning cloth draped around the sides. 2 masked executioners waited, the regular headsman and his assistant, both hidden behind false beards. Charles spoke for 17 minutes to the crowd below. "Well, I must tell you that liberty and freedom consists in having government by those laws by which their life and their goods may be most their own." His final words to the executioner, "I shall go from a corruptible to an incorruptible crown." One clean stroke with a heavy axe. The crowd groaned like wounded animals. Some rushed forward to dip handkerchiefs in royal blood, selling them for 6pence within hours. Within days, express messengers galloped across Europe carrying news that shook every throne. Louis XIV expelled the English ambassador immediately and banned English merchants from French ports. The Holy Roman Emperor refused to recognize the English Commonwealth, but the psychological damage cut deeper. If English subjects could kill their anointed king, what stopped French peasants from storming Versailles, German citizens from challenging Habsburg rule? The divine right of kings died on that Whitehall scaffold. Coffee houses in Amsterdam hosted debates about regicide. Underground presses in Geneva printed Republican manifestos. Revolutions that wouldn't happen for another century started planning that afternoon. Number 2, Marie Antoinette, October 16th, 1793, Place de la Révolution, Paris. The Austrian princess, who became France's most hated queen, faced the same blood-stained guillotine that had killed her husband 10 months earlier. She was 37 years old with hair turned completely white from terror during imprisonment. The Revolutionary Tribunal had decided her fate before the first witness testified. The trial was orchestrated by Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, the prosecutor who had sent over 2,500 people to their deaths since March. Conspiracy with foreign enemies, including her brother, Emperor Leopold of Austria, corrupting her young son with royalist propaganda, sending French military secrets across enemy lines during wartime. Her defense attorney, Claude Chauveau-Lagarde, was given 1 day to prepare. He knew arguing meant his own execution. Guilty on all charges. Death within 24 hours. The fallen queen had spent 76 days in the Conciergerie prison's most miserable cell, measuring 12 feet by 8 feet with moisture seeping through stone walls. 2 guards watched constantly through iron bars, recording every movement. She slept on straw behind a makeshift screen from old Versailles tapestry. Hemorrhaging from uterine cancer had weakened her so severely she could barely stand during trial sessions. Her companion Rosalie Lamorlière later testified that Marie Antoinette prayed for her executioners every night. Prison records listed her as Widow Capet, erasing her royal identity. Prisoner number 280, morning execution under autumn rain. 40,000 Parisians packed the square where her husband had died. She stumbled, climbing the scaffold, exhaustion from months of interrogation in freezing cells. The executioner tied her hands with coarse hemp rope that cut her wrists. Her final words were an apology to the guard whose foot she stepped on. "I did not do it on purpose." 11:37 precisely. The blade fell. The crowd celebrated for 3 days straight with dancing and wine flowing freely. But something infinitely darker had been born. Not just revolution, industrialized terror. The machine that consumed the queen would claim 17,000 more heads in 14 months. Robespierre's committee processed victims at factory speed, sometimes 50 executions daily. The executioner complained his arms ached from constant killing. Blood demanded more blood. The revolution devoured its own children. Within 8 months, even Robespierre himself would meet the same blade. Number 3, Mary Stewart, February 8th, 1587. Fotheringhay Castle, England. The Queen of Scots, who claimed Elizabeth's throne, faced a heavy executioner's axe in a makeshift death chamber inside the castle's great hall. 19 years of captivity had aged her beyond her 44 years. 300 English nobles packed the hall to witness royal Catholic blood flow on Protestant soil. Elizabeth had signed the death warrant 6 days earlier with a shaking hand, then locked herself in Greenwich Palace, refusing visitors while contemplating this unprecedented act. The warrant traveled north under armed escort. Mary had plotted Elizabeth's assassination through coded letters smuggled in beer barrels to Chartley Manor. The Babington plot involved 14 Catholic conspirators led by Anthony Babington, planning to murder Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne with Spanish support. Sir Francis Walsingham's spy network intercepted every treasonous letter. All 14 conspirators were hanged, drawn, and quartered at Tyburn. But Mary carried royal blood blessed by God. Ancient law demanded the axe. The execution chamber reeked of sawdust spread thick to absorb blood. A wooden block 18 inches high sat center stage. The Earl of Shrewsbury read the death warrant in Latin then English. Mary listened without emotion, fingering rosary beads and whispering prayers in French. She had spent her last night dictating letters to the French ambassador and her confessor. Her servant Melville wept openly. Mary remained composed with royal dignity intact. 8 in the morning as February's snow fell outside narrow windows. Mary wore brilliant crimson velvet, the Catholic color of martyrdom chosen to send a message to Protestant Europe. She forgave the masked executioner and pressed gold coins worth 10 pounds into his palm. "I hope this will give you better fortune, for you will never have a more noble task." She knelt at the block and stretched her neck across the blood-stained surface. The first stroke missed and struck her skull. She groaned but didn't move. The second stroke nearly severed her neck. The third finished the work. When the executioner lifted her head, her wig slipped off, revealing gray stubble on an almost bald skull. Her lips moved silently for 15 minutes after death. News reached King Philip at El Escorial within 12 days via English Catholic refugees. Philip had been planning action against England for years, but Mary's martyrdom gave him the holy crusade he needed. The Catholic Queen of Scots was dead. Protestant England had murdered his fellow Catholic monarch. The Spanish Armada sailed that spring, 130 warships carrying 30,000 soldiers. Pope Sixtus promised Philip 1,000,000 ducats once English soil fell. English cannons sank 67 Spanish ships. 8,000 sailors drowned in Atlantic waters. The age of Spanish dominance ended in those storms, while England emerged as the new naval superpower. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from tribunal records and eyewitness testimonies. Now back to the story. Number 4, Anne Boleyn, May 19th, 1536, Tower of London, England. The queen who shattered England's relationship with Rome faced a skilled French swordsman imported from Calais, where such executions were considered merciful. Henry VIII had loved her enough to defy Pope Clement, divorce Catherine of Aragon, and split the English church from papal authority. Now he wanted her eliminated quickly to marry Jane Seymour within 24 hours. The show trial lasted 3 days before 26 carefully selected peers, including her uncle Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, who condemned his niece to save himself. Fabricated charges included adultery with 5 men, including court musician Mark Smeaton, courtiers Sir Henry Norris and William Brereton, poet Thomas Wyatt, and her brother George Boleyn, high treason against the king's person. Plotting Henry's assassination, evidence was transparently false. Smeaton confessed under torture. Others denied everything until execution. Court records prove Anne was pregnant or recovering during most alleged encounters. No credible evidence existed. But Jane Seymour's ambitious brothers wanted Anne destroyed. The verdict was predetermined: death by burning or beheading at Henry's discretion. Henry chose the imported sword. Anne spent her final days in the same Tower apartments where she had prepared for her coronation 3 years earlier. Sir William Kingston reported her shifting moods to Thomas Cromwell daily. She laughed inappropriately, wept suddenly, practiced her scaffold speech obsessively. She asked repeatedly about the French executioner's skill. "Either I have heard the executioner is very good," she told Kingston with dark humor. "I have a little neck." She laughed while encircling her throat with both hands. Chilling witnesses. 10 in the morning on clear Friday. Anne wore grey damask with a white coif covering her famous dark hair. She delivered a careful speech praising Henry as a gentle prince while requesting prayers. She knelt upright, refusing blindfold and chopping block. The swordsman stood behind with a 3-foot blade. "Where is my sword?" she asked, turning toward the crowd. The executioner had signaled his assistant to create this distraction. The blade severed her neck cleanly in that calculated moment. Her lips moved wordlessly for seconds after her head rolled across blood-stained straw. Parliament declared her daughter Elizabeth illegitimate that afternoon, removing the child from royal succession. But bastard blood proved stronger than legal claims. When Mary Tudor died childless in 1558 after burning 300 Protestant heretics, Elizabeth seized the throne despite questionable birth and Catholic opposition. That condemned bastard became England's greatest queen, ruling 45 years of unprecedented prosperity. Elizabeth's reign elevated England from European backwater to global power, challenging Spain and France. Shakespeare wrote masterpieces under her patronage. Drake circumnavigated the globe. Raleigh established Virginia. The Armada's defeat established English naval supremacy, all because Henry murdered the wrong woman while letting her daughter transform England into a global empire. Number 5, Joan of Arc, May 30th, 1431. Old Market Square, Rouen, France. The peasant girl who crowned a king faced English flames at 19. She had lifted the 4-month siege of Orleans with 4,000 soldiers against 8,000 English troops who seemed invincible. She drove English armies back across the Loire Valley for the first time in decades. She changed the 100 Years' War that had raged 93 years. Now she would burn as a witch in English-controlled territory. The trial was orchestrated by Pierre Cauchon, Bishop of Beauvais, who received 1,000 livres from English coffers. 61 charges, including heresy for claiming divine revelation from Saints Michael, Margaret, and Catherine, witchcraft for impossible military victories, wearing masculine clothing, violating biblical law. The University of Paris provided theological arguments. The English provided unlimited gold. John of Lancaster desperately needed Joan discredited to undermine Charles VII's legitimacy as anointed King of France. Joan had been captured at Compiègne by Burgundian soldiers and sold for 10,000 livres, the price of a substantial castle. Her trial dragged 3 months with over 12 public sessions and countless private interrogations. English guards chained her to a bed in freezing Rouen castle dungeons. She attempted escape twice, nearly succeeding both times. The verdict was guaranteed from opening day: death by fire unless she recanted her visions and confessed witchcraft. She signed a confession May 24th to avoid burning, then tore it up 4 days later when she realized it meant lifelong imprisonment. "My voices came from God himself," she declared. "I take back nothing." 9 in the morning under threatening clouds. Joan wore white shift and pointed cap marked heretic, relapsed, apostate, idolater in Latin script. 800 English soldiers surrounded the square preventing French rescue attempts. Executioner. Geoffroy Therage built her pyre unusually high with green wood producing thick smoke. She would suffocate before flames reached her. A small mercy. She requested a wooden cross and pressed it against her chest. An English soldier fashioned her a rough cross from broken sticks. Her final word was, "Jesus," spoken 6 times as smoke filled her lungs. The fire burned 3 hours. English soldiers stirred the ashes and scattered them in the Seine to prevent relic collection. 25 years later, Pope Calixtus overturned her conviction after papal commission found massive procedural violations. The witch became a martyr. The martyr became a saint in 1920. But transformation began immediately. French soldiers rallied, crying her name at Castillon in 1453, finally expelling English forces from all French territory except Calais. Joan's death gave France an indestructible national soul that would survive any foreign domination. The peasant who died in English chains became eternal French resistance. Number 6, Maximilien Robespierre. July 28th, 1794. Place de la Révolution, Paris. The architect of terror faced his own guillotine after sending 12,000 to their deaths in 14 months. Robespierre, the incorruptible, had transformed from provincial lawyer to France's most feared man. Crowds that once cheered his speeches about virtue now screamed for his blood with identical fervor. The previous night was chaos. The National Convention outlawed Robespierre and 21 supporters after months of growing opposition to his paranoid dictatorship. When soldiers came to arrest him at Hôtel de Ville, Robespierre tried shooting himself rather than face his machine. His shaking hand sent the bullet through his jaw instead of his brain, leaving him alive but horribly wounded. He lay bleeding on a wooden table for 14 hours while allies fled Paris. The surgeon who examined him refused treatment. No doctor would risk touching the fallen dictator. No friend dared speak in his defense. The revolution had consumed its own creator. Paris erupted in celebration before Robespierre reached the scaffold. Citizens danced in streets where they had hidden in terror for 2 years. Overcrowded prisons emptied as guards fled. Vendors sold Robespierre cakes, shaped like severed heads, while children played execution games. The Thermidorian reaction had begun, named for the revolutionary month when tyranny devoured itself. 6:30 in the evening under gray skies, executioner Charles-Henri Sanson, who had killed both king and queen, prepared to complete royal revenge. Robespierre's supporters died first, 21 heads in 38 minutes. The fastest mass execution of the terror. The crowd counted each blade drop. When Robespierre's turn came, the executioner ripped the bandage from his shattered jaw to fit the lunette. His scream echoed 3 blocks away. 40,000 Parisians cheered louder than any previous execution. The blade fell at 1843. Crowds rushed the scaffold for his blood, selling vials for 6 sous each. With Robespierre dead, terror died permanently. The killing machine that had systematically devoured France for 2 years stopped completely. Prisoners walked free from jails where they had awaited death. The law of suspects was repealed. The guillotine moved from city center to a remote corner. France had exhausted itself with blood. Churches reopened, theater resumed, commerce returned. The revolution's fever broke when its most fanatic prophet lost his head to his own creation. Number 7, Saddam Hussein, December 30th, 2006. Camp Justice, Baghdad, Iraq. The dictator who ruled through terror faced a hangman's rope at 69 after 24 years of absolute power. 2 wars with Iran killing 500,000. Invasion of Kuwait bringing American tanks to Baghdad. Chemical weapons at Halabja, where 5,000 died in one day. Mass graves containing 300,000 bodies. His trial lasted 3 years. His execution took 4 minutes. The Iraqi High Tribunal convicted Hussein of murdering 148 Shia civilians in Dujail in 1982 following a failed assassination attempt. Judge Rauf Abdelrahman sentenced him to death after rejecting defense arguments. Hussein's team, led by former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, claimed American interference violated international law. His half-brother Barzan Ibrahim al-Tikriti and Judge Awad Hamed al-Bandar received identical sentences. Death warrants were signed by President Jalal Talabani and Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, despite international clemency calls from the Vatican and European Union. Hussein spent final months at Camp Cropper, an American military prison near Baghdad airport. His cell measured 12 by 15 feet with concrete walls and one small window. He wrote daily poetry in classical Arabic and read the Quran for hours. American guards reported he remained defiant, calling himself President of Iraq, even after conviction. He refused family visits during his final week, claiming they would destroy his dignity. His last meal was chicken with rice and tea. He declined prison sleeping pills. 5:58 in the morning on Eid al-Adha, Islam's holiest festival. The execution chamber was a converted warehouse. Hussein wore black coat and white shirt. He carried his Quran and refused the offered blindfold. Iraqi officials recorded everything on cell phones, despite American objections. Hussein's final words were prayers mixed with defiance, directed at Shia witnesses taunting him with chants of Muqtada, referring to cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. "Is this your manhood?" he asked contemptuously. His last words, "Palestine is Arab." The trapdoor opened at 6:05. His neck broke instantly from the 7-foot drop. The executioner was later identified as a Shia militiaman whose 3 brothers had died in Hussein's prisons. Personal revenge disguised as justice. Within hours, grainy cell phone videos spread across the internet faster than any previous execution in history. YouTube, Facebook, and news sites carried the footage to over 100 million viewers in the first week. The images were analyzed frame by frame across the Arab world. If Saddam Hussein could hang like a common criminal, any dictator could fall. Tunisia's Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia 13 days after watching the video. Egypt's Mubarak faced trial after 30 years of military rule. Libya's Gaddafi died in a roadside ditch with a bullet through his skull. Syria's Assad watched his country tear itself apart in civil war continuing today. One execution in Baghdad created shockwaves across the entire Middle East, toppling governments and igniting revolutions that transformed the region permanently. 7 deaths. 7 moments when history pivoted on blade edges. But here's what official histories omit. In 2018, construction workers renovating London's Old Bailey discovered a hidden stone chamber beneath the original scaffold site. Inside lay 7 antique execution masks, each marked with different dates spanning 4 centuries. The dates match our 7 executions exactly. Someone had been methodically collecting trophies from history's most consequential deaths. Someone who understood that when a head falls, the world reshapes itself around that empty space,